Okay, we are in
Did you get his email?
Kufyud Beis,
I didn't read it.
Halacha Zayin. Pas palbayis, asur, pas paltar is mutter, but pas palbayis, pas cooked by the guy by himself is always asur. I feel it stays asur forever. I feel kind of paltar mimenu, even if a paltar buys from him. But I feel shochel Yisroel basically, even if he sent it to a yid in his house, and I feel shochel so Yisroel la'acher, one yid send it to another yid. We'll explain this in a minute. Asur l'olam, it stays asur since it was baked as pas palbayis. The opposite case, the shapalter, if it was baked as pas palter, muteris l'olam, it stays mutter forever. I feel kind of balbayis on it, even if a guy who's a balbayis buys from him. It doesn't depend. The isser doesn't depend on who has the pas, but rather who owned it when you baked it.
Didn't we have a sheet about a month ago that was Mechalak Zayin, that when it was baked and then...
Very good, Yankee. You remember? Yes, we'll get to that. Halfway through. We'll get to that. That was very correct. This din over here is a machlokes, a rajma, and a ra'ah. Okay, this din that we're seeing here is a machlokes. In Teres Habayis, a machlokes. And the machlokes is as follows. Pas akum is asur because it might lead to chasnas. Pas palter is mutter because it doesn't lead. They were matter it in essence because it doesn't lead to chasnas, and there was such an important need to have bread. They were matter pas palbayis. Fine. So seemingly, if you want to decide if something is pas palter or pas palbayis, we're saying there's no kurva from a palter. You should make that decision by the person who you're getting it from. If I get it from a palter, he's a person who does. I have no kurva to him because he's just working in a bakery. He's just making foods for the public for sale. I have no kurva to him. The fact shouldn't make a difference who made the bread. Because whether the person who made it is a balbayis or the person who made it is a palter is not important. What should be important is who am I getting it from. Well, if I go to Jewel and I buy a loaf of bread, I don't feel any kurva to anybody. If I get a loaf of bread from my neighbor, I feel a kurva to him. It shouldn't make a difference who baked the bread. The decision if it's a palter or it's not pas palter should depend on who I get the bread from. That's what in svara it should depend on who is my contact. Who am I having contact with? With an individual or with or someone who's doing it as a business? That's in svara. It should depend on that. But on the other hand, am I being clear about that? That the svara it should depend on that. But on the other hand, Xeris to Rabbanon, all have a reason for them. But usually the Xeris doesn't the application of it applies even when the svara doesn't apply. Chacham made an isser of pas palter, pas akum. It applies even if there's no kurva. So for example, the original Xer of Pas Akum was even for Pas Palter. Even if there's no kurva, it applies. So there's a special kula for Pas Palter, but not every case has to fit into the svara of it. The original svara to be marked Pas Palter because there's no kurva. So the way the Rabbanans usually work is the Chacham have it for a reason, but once they create it, then it stays, and that's the rules are the rules. Okay. So the Rashba says he holds misvara like the second pshat, the second way. Which is to say that in Svara he says, once a Chacham made the takana, it depends if a palter made it or didn't make it. It doesn't make a difference whether technically I have kurva or not from buying it from the guy. It depends on who baked it. Okay? And he has a raya to his death. He has a raya to this way. The Gemara says, he brings a Gemara that says, if a guy had a whole storehouse full of grain, and yayin nesach poured onto his grains, okay, so his grains just became treif. They just, they soaked in some yayin nesach, the treif. So the Gemara says first, well, let him sell the grains to a guy. The Gemara says, put the hand on the side. The Gemara says, let him sell the grain to the guy. So the Gemara says, they can't do that, because maybe the guy will sell to a yid. The grains don't look like they have yayin nesach, and they're just like plain old grains. So a yid might end up eating from this thing, so you can't do that. So the Gemara says, okay, what he should do is, turn this grain into flour, and then bake it into bread, and then give that bread to a guy when the yid can't see it. Well, not like in public that a yid would notice it. He should privately give it to a guy, the bread to a guy, or sell it to a guy, this bread. So the Rashi says, what's going on here? Why is he giving it to him privately? Like, what's going on over here? So he says like this. The reason is like this. If I give the bread privately to a guy, no yid will ever buy from him, because it's pasakum. They'll see that he has the bread. He's a private person. No one's going to buy the bread from him, because it's pasakum. But if you didn't know that I baked it and I gave it to him, then they'll be happy to buy it from him because they'll know it came from my house. So if it came from me, they'll be able to buy it from him. So the Rashi says, wait a second. You're telling me is that since the Yid bought, if the Yid would have baked, if they would know that the Yid baked it, they would buy it. But why isn't it kurva? They're getting it from a guy.
Maybe you're going to give it to a paltar.
The Gemara, no. So then you can't explain to me why you can't give it. Why can't you? You're going to give it to a
paltar b'tzina.
Oh, you're going to give it. Oh, what's like? You're going to give it to a paltar
So if you give
publicly.
it
But don't take from me in.
Just the opposite. If it's a paltar, then they'll buy from him. Then they will buy from even if I gave it to him privately. No, you're not making it good. If I gave it to a paltar, just the opposite. Then they're going to buy it from him.
Right, that's
The Gemara says you're allowed to give it to him privately. You're allowed to. You're supposed to give it to him privately. Because privately, no one would dare buy it from the guy because it's pasakim. So why, if I give it to him in public, why people know about it? Will they do it? Because they'll say it's a Jew's bread. They know that it's a Yid's bread. Wait a second, but the kurva. If you decide whether this kurva by when the time of when you contact the guy. Then what do they care that it originally once was pas of Yisroel? Right now, the pas is coming from an akum. If it's coming from an akum, there should be korva. So you see that you don't care about what the interaction between the yid and the goy. That's not how you decide it. It depends on the baking. If it was baked by a yid, it's mutter. Baked by goy, it's aser. So in this case, if the people would know that it was baked by a yid, it'll be mutter. They'll be allowed to buy it. And they can't because it's stam yayin. They can't buy because of the stam yayin. So give it to them privately. No one will know that it was baked by a yid, so no one will buy it, and the yid will not eat the stam yayin, not eat the yayin. Okay, so that's what the Rashi says. It says so this is saying it l'kula. This is saying it. This is saying it. This is saying it le. Kula, no, l'chumra.
Why is it l'chumra?
It's l'chumra. If they would have seen me give it to the yid, no, we're saying l'kula. If they would have seen me give it to the guy, then they would take it.
Right.
But he says the same thing as l'chumra. What would be if it was the other way around? What happens if a guy baked the bread and he gave it to the yid, or a pas balbayis, a balbayis baked the bread and he gave it to a paltar? It would stay usher. It's the same thing. Now the Rashi says he has another raya to this thing, just a svar from him. He says, what would be if you tell me that pas akum is only usher because of my interaction with the guy who I give it to? That means if the akum gives me bread, I can't eat it. But if I give the bread to another yid, he should be allowed to eat it because he didn't get it from the akum. He got it from me. if you only care about the interaction, it's at that time it's if it's mutter usher. So for me it's usher. As soon as I give it to the next yid, it becomes mutter. So he says obviously that can't be. So you see, you don't care about, it's not that as you transfer it, you decide if it's pas paltar or pas akum, you decide at the time of the baking, which would be like a normal draban. Now, the Ra'ah has no problem with the Rajba's Raya. He accepts the Rajba's Raya from the Gemara. But he says there's a difference between the Rajba's case, the case of the Gemara, and the regular case. And what we want to use it, which is like, he says, pas paltar, pas of Yisroel, in the case of the Gemara, the Yid would have baked the bread, that's mutter forever. Can't become usher. Pas of a paltar is usher. Pas of a paltar is plain old pas akum. All pas akum is usher. But Chazal, because of the doichak of people eating bread, said, if you buy it from a paltar, at that point you get a heter. You get a heter to eat the food. Meaning, when he baked it, it was pas akum. It doesn't make a difference whether the akum or the paltar buys it. There's a special heter. If you buy it from a paltar, then there's a kula. You're allowed to eat it. There's a special kula for that case. So that kula completely depends on the time of the interaction. If a yid baked it, it's of course it's mutter forever. If a goy baked it, whether he's a paltar or a baal bayis, it's always usher. There's a special kula if you happen to buy it from a guy who's a paltar, you have a special kula. And that kula chumra depends on who you're buying it from. It doesn't make a difference who baked it. It only depends on who you buy it from. If you go to Jewel, it's always mutter. If you go to your neighbor, it's always usher. It doesn't make a difference who made it a week ago. It doesn't make who actually baked it. It depends who you're buying it from. And he brings a riot to that. He says, if you look, he doesn't call it that, but in halacha dalad, we had it in, that if you come to a city, if you have a city that there's no Jewish baker, so you'll have to eat pas paltar. What happens if a Jewish baker shows up in town? Then you're not allowed to buy from the paltar. As soon as the yid leaves, then you can buy from it again. He says, now when if the yid comes to town and the guy already baked his bread, you're not allowed to buy his bread because pas paltar is not mutter. You say, why not? But the time he baked it, he was a paltar that was mutter. You say, no, because now you have pas Yisroel available. He says, and then if the yid leaves town, you could buy the pas paltar even if the guy baked it while the yid was around in town. It doesn't depend on the baking. It's that there's a special kula that if you're buying it from a paltar, it's mutter. So if there's a yid in town, you don't have that special kula. That's what the Ra'ah holds. Okay, so he holds that there's really two different things. Whether it's pas Yisroel or pas akum is decided at the baking. Whether it's a kula of pas paltar or no pas paltar, that's deciding at the transaction. When you buy it from the guy, that's when it's decided. To the point that he has a clair. What happens if I ask a guy to go to another guy to buy bread for me? We say in shlichus la'akum. So maybe I should be getting it from the guy and not from the paltar. Here's a whole cheshbon as to why maybe all kinds of an unusual case that maybe there should be a shot. Okay, so our din over here, halacha zayin, is saying like the Rashba. It's saying that we make the decision as to whether something is pas Yisroel or the decision as to whether something is pas Yisroel or pas paltar is decided at the time of baking. It doesn't have anything to do with the time of the transaction when I actually buy it from you, even though in the svara of it might depend. You would think that it would depend on it. Okay, now this whole thing that the Mechaber is saying is all very nice thing. It does to us. It's not negate such a thing. What kind of thing is that? My next door neighbor would give me a package of bread that had hashgacha, but like we don't really have such an example like this. It's not such a practical case, but there is a practical application, which is
sure. If you hold that shit that the companies have it in a way, it gives you any. Imagine
if your neighbor, if your not Jewish neighbor would buy you a loaf of bread in the store, a pas paltar, then it would be negate. You're right. I'm saying, but it's not such a practical case. I mean, how many times do you ask your neighbor to go to the store for you? If it's okay, fine. That's such a thing. But there's a really not a case that's much more practical that the poskim no one talks about it because to them it was completely impractical. For us, it's very practical because the world has changed dramatically. And the thing is like this. Not for the case of pas paltar. What about for the case of bishul akum? Okay, bishul akum has no heter of paltar, no heter for paltar. But bishul akum has two other big kulas. If it's nechachai or if it's eno shulchan melachim. Okay, so what happens if you have a food that the guy cooked it in a place where for him, let's say it was nechachai. What happens if he cooked it in a place where it was nechachai, and he sells it to me in a place where it's not nechachai? Okay, now this shiloh was never negated to the place because it's not a normal situation. I mean, I didn't get it from 500 miles away. But nowadays, it's very much negated. We get food from very far away. So what happens if the guy cooked it in a place where there is or isn't bishul akum, and he sent it to another place where it's the opposite? Okay? And I have a bunch of examples for you. Okay, the shiloh is going to be, what are you going to do in that kind of a case?
What is the case?
So heart to palm. That's interesting you should say that, because I did not write that as one of my cases. Because
what is the shiloh here? I'm sorry.
Okay, the shiloh is that what happens if the guy cooks food in a place where it's let's say it is nechachai, okay, and he sends it to here where it's not nechachai. So for me, the first right in this country, I'm going to give you some examples in a second. In this country, we don't eat this food raw. So in this country, it needs bishul Yisroel. But where the guy baked it, it didn't need bishul Yisroel. When he baked it, it was nechachai. Okay, so now you said about hearts upon. It's interesting because
how is that?
What his question is, I'm going to give you an example, but I was not going to use that example because his question is that hearts upon in the countries that they grow at, people eat them raw, but over here we only eat them canned. Okay,
because that's the way they
I spoke to someone many years ago, I think it was in Brazil. Who said that the people that they taste absolutely wonderful and everybody would be happy to eat them raw,
for transportation.
But it just doesn't work. I mean, realistically, to get here, they have to cook them and can them, and even here we would eat them raw. So it's not a good. Yes. Okay, that's a little bit of a question. That's pretty straightforward because if you had a chance, you really would be happy to eat it. Okay? But there's a bunch of other examples. In America,
they don't grow over here.
No, they don't. Also,
what is hearts
of palm? You grow palm trees, and when they're very small, very young, they take out the insides of the tree. But it's a very labor-intensive work. It kills the tree, so it only can be done in places where labor costs nothing.
And Ecuador.
A place like this, and you have lots of place to grow a zillion palm trees and keep harvesting them. Okay, so in America, we eat.
Yeah.
Shahakam?
That's not what Rebelsky said.
Oh.
The Gemara says that it's shahako. Rebelsky said that since it's grown for this thing, they make hadama. We can talk about that afterwards. We'll talk about that. Okay. Okay. So in America we eat button mushrooms raw.
What?
That's the little mushrooms, regular mushrooms. What you call regular mushrooms? Button mushrooms.
Look like a bun.
We eat them raw, and it seems that in Eretz Yisrael they don't eat them raw. They only eat them cooked. Another example in Mexico, tortillas are oleh shulchan melachim. That's like a bread, so to speak. according to Tia, is, and in America, maybe now they are, but surely until recently,
Wheat tortillas.
no, okay. According to Tia is the simpler ones. It's simple for the Bishul.
It's not bad. Why is it Bishul?
Okay, yeah, I don't want to get into that. We did that last week. So the quantities in America, maybe now they're starting to be oleh shulchan, but Pashas is that they were not oleh shulchan. Or another example, artichokes here and in Spain are not nechachai. People eat them after they cook them. And one of the other countries that they make them in is Egypt. And there, it seems, I've never been there, but it seems that they are nechachai. People eat them. Thank you. Okay, another two examples is that in Eretz Yisrael, hummus is oleh shulchan lachem. While over here, that's considered like a food that you serve. The lahat is a pas, but over here, it's not.
And what happens if you're flying in a plane?
Okay, don't bother me. And the last one is this is I was surprised to see that Dayan Falk brings that Rav Vazner in Tshuva, and it's really there. Says that in Eretz Yisrael sardines are oleh shulchan lachem. Okay, cans are little tins of sardines are oleh shulchan lachem. And of course, in America, no one would treat that sardines are oleh shulchan lachem. Okay, so anyhow, so there's a bunch of examples. So let's use the example of mushrooms as our example that's going to work with. Okay, what would you say if you cooked mushrooms in a place where they are not nechachai? I don't know if this is true, but let's say in China they don't eat them raw, just like in Eretz Yisrael. So whatever they made mushrooms in China, they're not nechachai, and then they send them to me where I would eat mushrooms. People in America would eat mushrooms raw. So should I say, when he cooked it, it was bishul akum because he was in a place where it was not nechachai. And the fact that it comes to me and I would eat it raw doesn't mean anything. He cooked it in a place where it was needed bishul Yisroel. It was not bishul Yisroel, so it's also. Or should you say, what's the reason why things that are not nechachai, don't need bishul Yisroel? Right? We're not getting it because he didn't do anything for me. What did he do for me? It's a food that I could have eaten anyhow, so it's not such a benefit that he made it taste a little better. He says, well, so then you have to judge it by the user. Did I gain anything by it? So the fact that he cooked it is one thing, but I didn't gain anything because for me, I could eat it raw anyhow. Okay? Or Dayan Falk has a third possibility. Okay? And his third possibility is maybe when the guy cooks it, on the mushroom is chal, that for these people it's mutter, and for these people it's also. Okay? He says, for some people it's mutter, the mushroom has a bunch of din into it. He himself, he talks about prayer. He himself is not happy with that. He gets rid of that third possibility. It's like really far-fetched. Okay, so let's just think a second. This case we're talking about that a food which is oleh shulchan lachem in one place, but not, and it was cooked in a place where it was, let's say, oleh shulchan lachem, and eaten someplace where it's not. Okay, so our din is l'chayra, a direct right to this case. The Rashba was saying, we're passing like the Rashba who says, the decision as whether the food is pas paltar or pas habayis, in svara should be decided at the time of the transaction. Do I have a kurva from the person I buy from? But the din is no, we decide at the time of the baking. At the time of the baking of the bread, we decide it is being made by a paltar, that it's mutter, even if I get it from habayis. If it's baked by a habayis, it stays usher, even if I have to get it from a paltar. So that's the same, it's almost the same shayla as by the bishul akum. At the time of the cooking, it was or was not bishul akum, depending on the way they cook it, let's say in the mushroom. In our case, it was bishul akum. The fact that when it gets to me, it would theoretically be excused from bishul akum because I would be nechachai. It's too late. You have to make the decision. You don't have to think about it in the sort of it. Me, the eater, am I getting a food that's nechachai? It's at the time of the cooking you make that decision. Does it need bishul Yisroel or does it not need it? That's when you make that decision. The fact that I am eating it in a place that would or would not, it doesn't make a difference. It depends at the time of baking. So l'chayra, our din is a very straight. Seems to be a clear riot. The din is talking about whether it's pas paltar or pas habayis. But l'chayra should be right to this case. And it's even more than from our din. Because I would say that even the Ra'ah who argued on our din would agree to by bishul akum. Why? The Ra'ah said, really, pas Yisroel, whether something is pas Yisroel or pas akum is decided at the time of baking. He agreed to the right it's decided at baking. But the special kula of pas paltar is, even though the bread is usher, the special kula of pas Yisroel, of pas paltar is decided at the time of the transaction. That's a special thing because of pas paltar is a special kula that's thrown in later on. But if you go to something like nechachai, which is in the core of the din of bishul Yisroel, it's not like an external kula that if it's nechachai you get off the hook. It's built into the fabric of bishul Yisroel is that if it's nechachai it doesn't need bishul Yisroel. Even the Ra'ah should agree that that's decided at the time of the cooking. The Ra'ah agreed that decisions of these kind are decided at the time of cooking. It's only the external kula that was thrown in later was a special. Chazal let you off the hook with this like a later on kula. So that is decided depending on your need as you buy it. But if you have a thing that's from the actual makeup of the din itself, like whether a food is nechachai, not nechachai, even though Usher agrees it's made at the time of cook. That decision is made at the time of cooking. Now, even though I think this is correct, I can't not tell you that they asked Rebelsky this question about Bishul Yisroel once, okay, and he said something very surprising. Okay, and I'll tell you what he said. Even I don't understand it. He said like this. He said, "What if a food was eina oleh shulchan melachim?" He says that food is really bishul akum. We have a food that's not oleh shulchan melachim. Let's say sardines. Okay, sardines are really bishul akum when they cook them because they're going to cook them. But you have a special heter to eat it because since it's not so formal, you're allowed to eat the food anyhow. Okay, that's what he says. And therefore, that's decided at the time that you eat it. It's not decided at the time when they baked it, when they cooked it. Now, for starters, I haven't a clue where he got that from. Okay, we would assume that ein oleh shulchan melachim means that therefore it's not subject to bishul akum because he didn't do something so significant. He made just a little, not an unimportant food. What Busky is saying is that it's like you're really it is bishul akum, but you're allowed to eat it because it's not such a formal food. So I don't know where he got it from.
Well, maybe it has to do with the din, how the Rabban had the koyach to ask or something, like I said before. Is it a din the chetzer, is it a din the gavra? If it's a din, the pasha is a din, the gavra, that we're asking you to eat this thing. So in such an instance...
Okay, why would you say that? Bishul akum, it's...
Okay, you're not saying what Rebelsky's saying, you're saying something else.
I'm trying to explain what he's saying.
No, he's not saying all bishul akum. Regular bishul akum is the food is usher. But this kula
How
is...
do they have the koyach to do that? I don't learn that they don't have a koyach to ask or if they have answered the person from the
we don't have to...
That's the children.
It doesn't make a difference because the second question is more significant. I don't know where you got it from. Let's say there's a right. But it doesn't make a difference because he is saying what the Ra'ah said. The Ra'ah said that if you have a food that at the time of the cooking, it was,
baking.
At the time of the baking, in the Ra'ah's case, it was bishul akum. You make a later, and there's a later decision as to whether it should be a paltar or not. You could follow the later decision to decide if it's paltar. Okay? But the Rashi says it's not true. The Rashi says, which is what our din says, even though there's a later possibility to be makel, we could be makel later on because it's ein oleh shulchan melachim, that all those decisions are made at the time of baking, or in our case, the time of cooking. So even if what he's saying is correct, within the rules of bishul akum, that oleh shulchan melachim means that it's a special pardon that you're allowed because it's not such a formal food, but we don't pass like that. We pass like the Rashba, that these decisions are made at the time of cooking, not later on. All decisions about whether a food is or is not mutter is made at the time of cooking. Okay? And his other thing, he said another thing which we're not going to talk about now, which is what happens if it's nechachai. He said a chiddush. He said that if a food is nechachai, if food is nechachai in one country, that was a shach. It was nechachai where they baked it, and not for me. Or the other way around. He says if it's nechachai in any place, that means is based on a shach that we're going to see in Kufiyat Gimel, very important shach. He says based on that the food is nechachai for everybody. Okay, if anybody is nechachai, it's nechachai for everybody, which is a huge chiddush even within the shach.
It's like Batal Daita.
No.
How about that kind of previous generation?
What'd you say?
Did we spend a generation for this?
No, that you would say. But we'll get to that shach. That shach is very important shach for the din of what considered nechachai. It's very important shach over there. But it's not so partial what he's saying. Okay. But anyhow, what I'm trying to say is the bottom line is I'm about to get to the bottom line, which is that when Rebelsky gave this shach, I don't see in that ruling. I was not so smart to know from this didn't connect to it. I don't see any connection. They're not even bringing this in. So, not having mentioned this din, it's hard for me to take it without at least asking him. Is what the din? Our din says you make all decisions about whether a food is bishul or pas, paltar or pas akum. All those decisions are made at the time of baking, and seemingly the same shiloh should be for cooking. Also, you should start bishul akum shilohs at the time of the cooking. So, if the time of the cooking, the guy is in a place where the food needs bishul Yisroel, it needs bishul Yisroel regardless of where it's headed to for the person who's going to eat, and vice versa. L'kula, if the person is cooking in a place where it's nechachai, so for him, it's not bishul akum. The fact that for me, it's not nechachai shouldn't make a difference. Everything is decided. We see in our din at the time of the cooking.
Okay. I don't know what that is. For me, it's not Shulchan Melachim. nothing was ever chal in Isra. I mean, I hear that my father the other sheet.
Yeah, but the shots when they bake.
I mean, it was not. It was not the make. There was no Isra. I didn't see an Isra over here. I mean, it's not able to come melachim again because I'm 5,000 miles away. It was good, Milan.
For you, if you went to the food over there, it would be also to you.
They baked it for you.
If you went over there to where the food is, it would be also to you.
Why is it not the most? It's only me.
Telling you the food is from one person's
When
bosom.
that's in America, it's not very Shulchan.
Are you asking if you went to the food?
Is it in the melachim? Or by me, this food doesn't become awesome because by me it's not Shulchan melachim.
If you went there, you would be also. It's a din in the market.
A kol kaminag amadina.
Because if I would eat
But they're either on Purim, you'd have to eat it cold.
If I would,
And I'm reading
All the
on
food
you
is there.
now.
It's also to everybody. All the food is there. The
Right.
food is a kaimeh b'shaita. All the food is there. It's also to everybody.
No, it's not.
You think that the food is like floating, and that for some people it's mutter, and for some people it
It's a din
doesn't?
in me. It's a din in the gavra.
Can I ask you, how come we said, aren't there two things, whether you have to kasher the keli?
Yes.
you're saying if I
Why
would,
don't we look at it that way?
That's the reality. That's not.
If you have to kasher the keli, so then it's the
So you should know that's a very good point. Oh, that is a very good point. That machlokes, whether you have to kash kalim, is it machalos asuros or is it not machalos? That's a very good point.
Very good.
And Rabbi he said the shaila as to whether bishul atom is a machalos asuros or whether it's just an isra on me to eat it is really the machlokes whether you have to kasher if a kli was used for bishul atom. If the food becomes machalos asuros, then you'd have to kasher it. If it's just that a person is not allowed to eat it, then you shouldn't have to kasher the food. It's not used for food. So he wants to say that you should, and that's very correct. This machlokes should depend on that. We'll see Mr. Hashem get to that din, because that din, Rabbi Shechter likes to point at that din to say that you see that it's not machalos asuros. There's a big question. There's around about it. There's a very big question. David Nezer attached himself to that din a lot, and we'll see when we get there. Okay, I think it's the last din or one of the last din. Okay, it's very important. But that's very correct. You could see from there. So what you would say is, you see from the fact that we hold that we do kasher if the bishul akum, that we consider machalos asuros. But you're right that there are rights from that
correlation.
Yeah. Okay, now, the one last example that I said last week I would maybe mention, I'll just mention it just to get it out, which is, it was really from the listing, which is bagels. Okay, that if you make a bagel, is the traditional way to make a bagel is you take the dough, you cook it in water, and then you bake it. Okay, so in the Chalkas Binyamin, in the last din, not in the previous din, he said, what would happen if in the cooking, the bagel would become edible kamachal ben jusay. It would be passably edible. So he said, l'chayra, at that point it would become usher. He said, it would become usher at that point. He said, let it become usher at that point. The fact that you later bake it and it becomes paltar shouldn't help. It will have already been usher at that point. During the cooking stage, it would have been usher, and the fact that it would later become a baked product that's considered paltar shouldn't make a difference. Okay, that's what he says, which is correct in theory. Correct in theory, in that if it would become kamat when soy l'chayr would be usher, it would be sort of our din, which is once it became usher, it wouldn't become later mutter by becoming pas palta later on. It would be too late. Okay, but of course, as I think he points out, that Lamai says that does not get cooked. And it's a very brief cooking, and he even reads it in. He brings the Chalkos Binyamin. He brings a tshuva from Moshe, where Moshe talks about the Shiloh, and he tells you, he correctly says that there's a typo in Ramesh Tshuva. Not like but a serious one. It says like Eina Nechol, or like there's a word Ein that's missing or extra. It's like, but he correctly is fixing the wording. So if in theory it would be cooked, it would be also, or maybe there's another food like that. But Lamais, I don't think it's cooked. And actually, the more modern way of making bagels is not to cook them first. What they do is they have an oven. Okay, it's a regular baking oven. But before the baking starts, there's a blast of steam for half a minute, for a minute, just for a short amount of time, and that gives the bagels their fluffiness that then they bake into it. They don't. They bluff. Yes. Instead of cooking it, mamish cooking it, and then putting it into a bagel, that's how the traditional way to make it is. The commercial bakeries, the commercial guys do is they have special ovens that let out steam first. They give out steam for a half a minute, and then they do the baking afterwards. Okay, there isn't the hamayitzi. I think it's always hamayitzi. I think the din said that's a din if you cook it and then you bake. Okay, we'll see. That's a din.
They boil it first.
Thank you.